you need people who are hard enough to do the work that needs doing and soft enough to be people at the end of it and maintain their humanity and their decency. I know, and it can certainly be a fine line.
So what kind of people are drawn to careers in emergency services anyways? Police officer, firefighter, paramedic. Dave, you got a few things to say on this matter. How you doing today, bud?
Good. Nice to see him, my friend. I have the famous afterthoughts after we have a nice little chat. When people apply to police services, they sometimes do a psychological profile and they found out that they fail. And what often occurred there is that they have found some behavioral indicators that suggest that they might be, for example, more inclined to abuse their authority, or they may be somebody who, they wasn't trustworthy because of the way they answered questions. Fire doesn't very much do that. It's starting to happen more, but they really kind of don't. I don't believe the paramedic services do it at all. But the thing I wanted to point out is they're also looking, when they do intake stuff, to see if you come into the system kind of pre-damaged. And that's what I wanted to talk about today for a minute, if we can have the time for that. If you ever saw the movie American Sniper, millions of people have seen it. It did very, very well in the box office. And so there's a scene in that film, American Sniper, where the dad is talking to the two boys at the kitchen table, brothers. And one of them had been engaged in a fight, a school ground fight, where he had inserted himself into a circumstance where a kid was being bullied. And the boys thought they were going to be in trouble, but the dad explained to them that in this world, there are sheep who need to be protected, and there are wolves who want to injure the sheep. And there's a very small group of people who become sheepdogs and separate the wolves from the sheep. They will give their lives to protect the sheep, and they will actually kill the wolves if they have to. The sheepdog thing is very interesting because very often we see it come up in the public safety sector, where someone has a predisposition or predilection to become a protector of some sort. What we want to drill down to a little bit today is sometimes that protector gene is triggered by events that happen in our childhood. So, and you'll see it in other fields. It's not unique just to the public safety sector. Most people who are child psychologists had very, very difficult childhoods. Most people who are eye doctors and ophthalmologists, they wear glasses because they're experienced with that. It's just one of those sort of natural progression things. But in the world that we're talking about, if you had a really difficult childhood, it can draw you into this as a protector. Perhaps you lived in an abusive home, or you watched abuse, or you saw people wreck their lives with the choices that they made. And you saw yourself powerless and helpless at the time. But now as a grown-up, you see yourself as somebody who can insert into that in that emotional morass and try to make a difference. So what I'm pointing out today is not that if you're that person, you're disqualified, but you really should, if you're at the stage of this where you're coming into the business, you should look up an online test called the Adverse Childhood Experience, ACE testing. We hopefully can add you a link for that. Adverse childhood experience is stuff that tells us that we're predisposed to injury later on. So it doesn't mean that you're disqualified. It means before you start a career where you're helping others, you really need to get your own self sorted out. So I strongly encourage everyone who has had any difficulty in their childhood to see a psychologist, get some work done, get that psychologist to know your baseline, and keep that psychologist throughout your career. We talk about this in another segment that, we really need to have somebody who knows this really well, so that if something really bad happens, they don't have to start with a sloppy mess. They actually are dealing with somebody that they kind of know. So that was a kind of wordy thing, but I think it's really important that in my experience, and I've worked a lot in PTSD work and in support groups and stuff, I've seen many, many cases where men, particularly men who were sexually abused as children, go into policing and their careers are cut short because they're simply at some way or another overwhelmed by it. So that's part of what we're looking for, actually, when we do intake testing. And you're not to feel that somebody took away your dream if that happens to you. It's an indicator that you need to do some work on yourself. As somebody with that background needs support throughout their career. As I say, they're not automatically disqualified, but they need support on that end, and they'll need support as they move forward.
Well, there's a lot to unpack there, Dave. And listen, with with my own law enforcement background and working with police services across the country, I've come across a lot of people who went through the process to become a police officer, but then they fail the psychological testing, which is one of the very, it's at the end of the process. They fail the psychological test. What's frustrating though is they don't always tell people why they failed or what they can
Mm.
improve on. And I know
No.
that might be difficult. If you're gonna if there's a dangerous, stressful situation that most people naturally they don't want to be a part of, and now it's your job to actually go and face that head on, you're probably gonna want somebody who's maybe I'm trying to be very polite about this, but who has the ability to maybe kind of go off a little bit. I'm sure there's a lot to unpack
Yeah,
there. What do
yeah.
you guys say?
I see yeah, no, I totally see what you're saying, but I think the people who, let's just call them lived experience candidates. Let's call them that. That's just kind of the way we can put that. Lived experience candidates can have full and rich and rewarding careers, but what we need to do in the whole sector is for people to complete the training and act predictably when it's time to apply that training in the field. So what we don't want is somebody to, say a police officer who's done really, really well, and he goes to a domestic, which is a terribly dangerous environment for your tribe, and he decides to beat the hell out of the husband. Now, I'm not putting any judgment on whether or not the husband needs a beating, but who is that officer actually beating? Is it his father? Is it his uncle? It's the people, his mother's old boyfriends. What's going on there? So that's an example of it. I think you need people who are hard enough to do the work that needs doing and soft enough to be people at the end of it and maintain their humanity and their decency. I know, and it can certainly be a fine line.
Okay, this is what I would like to kind of get to the bottom of right now. A lot of people who watch our episodes are interested in a career in law enforcement and firefighting, paramedic emergency services of some point. What can they do now? You mentioned a website, you mentioned a program. What can they do to right now to hopefully save them some hardship later as they're going down the process? Could you please get into that program a little bit or
Yeah,
the reference?
it's more of a self-directed recovery, but go
Okay.
online
Okay.
and find just Google adverse childhood experience, and you'll find some tests and some writings on there on that whole thing. It's not entirely embraced by every psychologist in the world, but it's a leading indicator with like a score of 0 to 12 or something of where you might fall in terms of your ACE score. And if you have a score of like 4 or more, you probably would be a candidate for some psychological support prior to doing any testing for the services. And I'm a big proponent of this. We don't wait till we have a toothache to go to the dentist. We have all of us go, and they're phoning all the time trying to make appointments, right? You want to do that at least twice a year with the dentist. You want to at least once a year see a psychologist who knows you, because almost all the time, whether on the job or not, when people finally realize they need to talk to somebody and they go to see somebody, they are just a sloppy mess when they get there, and the poor psychologist has to unwind all kinds of stuff just to be able to know who they are and what their personal needs really are. So it's a two-part thing. Go online and look at adverse childhood experiences and apply it to your own life, and get yourself a relationship with a psychologist so that somebody in the mental health world knows you before you start attacking the rest of the world.
Listen, that's great advice, and this is no joke either. I mean, there are, I know way too many people, way too many candidates that did not pass the psychological portion, and I don't know why. Even they don't know why. Anything that we can do to help ourselves mentally and prepare us, and listen, maybe realize that the job is not for us. And I'm not just talking
Yeah.
about policing. I mean, emergency
You mentioned
services in
that,
general.
you mentioned that in another section, was that, you've had your dream and your goal taken away. And in many cases, it might be the greatest gift anybody ever gave you, was not to have you, in that field, or they found that you had a predilection for violence you didn't even know you had. Like
Right?
that,
Yeah.
that's a gift, really, when you think
Right.
about it. Better than learning the hard way.
Great point. Listen, Dave, I appreciate the conversation today, bud. If anybody wants to know more about Red Friday Talks, please check out redfridaytalks.help. Redfridaytalks.help. Dave, have a fantastic day, brother. We'll chat with you soon.
Always a pleasure. Take care, man.